Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Women in Leadership Talk podcast. We have an exciting guest here today with us. We have Marika Messager. Marika, welcome. We're so glad you're here all the way from Kenya.
Thank you, Vicky. Very happy to be here with you.
Well, we're thrilled to have you, and we want to thank our audience for turning in today and having a listen to the conversation that we're gonna talk about. So I'm super excited because Marika actually focuses on something that is very near and dear to me as well, which is all around being a conscious leader. So I'm excited for us to jump in and just share with our audience more of your work and your thinking and the research that you've done. But just before we do that, let me just give a bit of a background on Marika. So Marika is the founder of an organization called consciousleadership.org. And she is a conscious leader. She's a visionary, a teacher, a researcher in consciousness, elevating individuals, businesses, and the global community into a new paradigm of positive and impactful purpose. And so we're super excited to have her here today and to share with us some of the learnings that she has discovered through her research and just the way that she's actually impacting our world. So Marika, I'm thrilled to have you, as I said, and I'm excited to jump in here. And maybe we can just kick off with you sharing a bit about your background and what's actually led you to, this research in conscious leadership.
Sure, with pleasure, Vicky. So I worked in finance for 14 years on a trading floor. So I started as an equity analyst, an equity sales, and then I was head of equities for Europe and the Middle East for a French bank. So I was managing 40 people, mostly men, mostly alpha male, white, and mostly older than me. So that was quite, challenging. And as I was doing so, I was successful quite early on because I had that promotion when I was 34, which is actually the year I gave birth to my son. So that's 15 years ago or more. I really had the opportunity to appreciate different types of leadership through my career and to really see that paradigm that I call now vintage, the old paradigm of leadership that is based on competition, domination, power games, a culture of hiding, a culture of me versus you, but never a culture of we. And as a sales, an equity sales, and an equity sales manager, I was really always trying to have people understand that it's better to have 20% of 100 rather than have 100% of 0. And just that perspective was really difficult to share and have people see and understand. So that was the background that, I was able to actually do a lot of research around what I call distorted leadership or even toxic work. And as I was also forced to work on myself because when I was 28, I had a family drama that forced me into self-development. So I was Parisian, I'm French, as you can hear with my accent, even though I've been in London for 15 years, it doesn't go away. But I started with seeing a therapist in Paris, and that already gave me some perspective on what it meant to actually see the world from just not me, but from, somebody else's shoes, right? So that really opened up a lot. And then I just kept searching. I'm a learner by essence, and I really wanted to discover. So I've tried many things, from hypnotherapy to yoga to mindfulness to working with shamans all over the world. And as I was doing so, I was really seeing a change within myself as a manager, as a leader. I was much more able to manage stress. I was much more resilient. A trading floor is a very kind of adrenaline place, right? Everything, there are so many noises everywhere. There is chaos everywhere. Something, a challenge, an obstacle is kind of minute after minute it happens, right? And so I could really see how I was changing and how I was not only able to perform better, but also to manage my team better and to become a role model for them. So that got me also into, wow, there is something there that I would like to explore further. And in 2012, my company was going through a big restructuration. There was like a merger and acquisition, and I was head of equities for Europe. And in September 2012, my boss came to see me and he said, Marika, your job is dead by the end of the year. But I love you. Let's find you another one. Would you like to be global head of research? And I was like, you know what? I think I'm going to go. And I'm going to give myself the time to actually explore all these things that are new to me, which are self-development, consciousness, because I had this realization that I knew a lot about how to make money, how to spend money, but that was it, right? I didn't know much about what it was to be a human being. And unfortunately, we are not being taught this at school at all. So I gave myself 2 years to experience more. And as I was finding things that were really resonating or helping me, I was training into them. So I trained as an integral coach, I trained as a yoga teacher, I trained as a clinical hypnotherapist, I trained as a Zen mindfulness teacher. I also was initiated in 2 lineages of shamanism, one from Mexico and one from the Amazons. That really elevated my understanding and my thinking about what it means to be a human being, and how really consciousness comes into that dimension, so that we have 4 bodies: the physical, the mental, the emotional, and the spiritual bodies. And those 4 bodies are really what makes us human. And we need to work on those 4 bodies, not only to bring them into alignment within, but also to elevate them so that we can raise our consciousness. So that actually life is more seen as a spiral of ascending growth, ever ascending growth. And if we have that understanding, we can really navigate that process of growth and elevation with, much more efficiency, much more smoothness, and gracefulness as well, and grace, I would say. And so this is when I really started to ask myself, I mean, I had a big kind of awakening moment in the forest in Brazil, when we were being asked to cut some wooden boards with our hands. And in all those initiations, because in shamanism you have initiations. I always knew within myself if that was going to be achievable for me or not. And when we were being asked to cut those wooden boards, I knew that, oh, that's going to be difficult. And I could see the people who were my peers in the course, and they were doing it, and I don't know why I had this knowledge, and I was like, it's not going to happen for me. And I tried, and it didn't work. And so my teacher sent me back on the bench, and then she called me back again, and I tried again. And all that happened is that I hurt my hand, and she sent me back on the bench. And then my whole body started to shake, and I started to cry. And trust me, I'm not a crier. If you want to survive and thrive on a trading floor, you know how not to cry. So I was really impressed by what was going on inside of me, and I was being present with that. And the teacher called me again. And she really told me, you're going through a big transition. It's a big transformation. And so she kind of, basically said the right words to me, and supported me to reclaim my power over what I was working on. And I broke the board. And what happened after was very interesting, because one of my colleagues in that course, who was a woman who was 55, and she was very strong, and I had a lot of gravitas, and we were friends, but it was probably the woman I had the most respect for in my group. She came to see me right after this, and she said, Marika, I would follow you anywhere and everywhere. And I was like, whoa, that's interesting. It's the day I completely fall apart and I break down that you'll come to see me and say that to me, right? And I was like,
That's
she was
beautiful.
like, yeah, exactly right, because she saw who I was in that moment of crisis and vulnerability. And that day I was like, this is leadership, and I had to kind of rephrase, rethink whole perspective of leadership, because in finance it's all about being strong and giving that image of having a mask and nothing affects you, and you're in control, and you're a killer, and you have a gun under your desk, and you have this warrior archetype that's overdeveloped. And so I came back from that month in the forest in Brazil, really thinking we need a new paradigm of leadership, and I need to bring that to the world. That was a long time ago. And since then, it's always been for me a question of what is the world ready for? And what is the change and what is the transformation that we can bring about. And conscious leadership, for me, I'm a pioneer in conscious leadership, but it really was a fantastic way to bring together consciousness and leadership, because for me they have to be together if we want a new paradigm of leadership.
Totally agree.
So
Marika.
you agree,
totally
right?
agree.
Yeah. So I strongly believe that there is no consciousness is something that really should resonate with everyone, that it's a quest, it's a personal quest, it's also a technology that is available to everyone, and that the more conscious we are, the more we are better leaders, and also the more we start to think about systemic change and how we can have a positive impact in the world, on the world. And today conscious leadership for me is really a living philosophy for a better future for all, and I mean individuals, organizations, the planet, the wider community, the collective.
The collective, absolutely. You're singing my language. I love conscious leadership, and the other aspect that you didn't mention that I just want to highlight is when we become more conscious, it actually helps us to make better choices, to make better decisions, because you're not reacting to life, you're actually responding to life. And so consciousness, to your point, it impacts the entire collective when we can see it from that lens. So I love that. And there's so many things for us to discuss today. And you said a number of things as you were speaking there about those power dynamics that happen in leadership, and especially on the trading floor. But that happens in a lot of corporations, but also in families, right? There's a push-pull power dynamic that's happening. And, one of the things that I see a lot, and I'm sure you're seeing it as well, is this level of toxic leadership that we have in the world. And so, I'd really love to hear your insight as to how you see that playing out and what that ripple effect is, because I think we need to be able to see that first before we can really see how important the conscious leadership is.
Yeah, and you're completely right, and in all our teachings, we always talk about the toxicity and the need to see it and to appreciate it before we can even start to talk about what does it look like from a place of consciousness and no more distortion, right? And I like to approach this from the angle of the feminine and the masculine within us. I talk a lot about the patriarchal system as well, and so there is distortion in the masculine polarity, and there is distortion in the feminine polarity, and we have within both of us, within us both polarities, regardless of genders. And my view is that we need to heal both polarities within us and outside of us. So the masculine polarity in its distorted way looks like manipulation, control, domination, competition, power games, which translates in an organization in a culture of hiding, right? Mm-hmm. And actually there is a lot of data around that. There is a fantastic data that says that between 6 to 12% of the revenue of a company is lost due to the cost of hiding, right? Mm-hmm. So hiding is nobody's taking responsibility. We throw the hot potato away to everyone. There is no accountability. So therefore there is just this culture of distrust. There is an inability to show up with authenticity, and therefore there is a lack of engagement. There is obviously a lack of employee retention. There is possibly no collaboration at all, no co-creation, and ultimately no performance. And more we see people talking about toxic workplaces. There is really coming out these days. We've seen some companies who have been kind of shamed for being toxic places in the news. And so that's what it looks like. And from the feminine polarity, which is the distorted feminine within us, we allow this, right? So the masculine, and that's coming from the patriarchal system, this, control, domination, power games, and all of that. And for the feminine, it's allowing this. So we tolerate this negative traits in our relationships, in our families, in our workplaces. And because the feminine doesn't feel that she deserves better, she doesn't feel that she's enough, she's good enough to have better, or she's scared of being rejected, or she's scared of, or she feels the need to people please in order to get external validation. So we need to also heal the feminine within us so that we can come and show up from a place of power, soft power, right? Where actually we own our worth, and we don't need external validation, and therefore we are not tolerating anymore what is not serving us.
Yeah.
So that's the work. And from an organizational perspective, when we can come to that place, this is where we can collaborate. This is where we can create win-win solutions for everyone. And we can really embrace a culture of we, a culture of versus a culture of me, simply put.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that. I love that. And just to emphasize there that you weren't talking about gender, you're talking about, you know, we're both feminine and masculine as a human being. And so how do we harmonize that? So I want to make sure, because sometimes I know I talk a lot about like feminine attributes and masculine attributes, and then people are like, they relate it to gender. And it's like, no, I'm not talking about gender. I'm talking about the attributes that we may be modeling or behaving with. And so I think that's a super important piece. So let's talk about that femininity, because I think that is such an important aspect of where we need to get to. We have had more of a masculine power dynamic for, you know, centuries. And then how do we, you know, I have my own thoughts on this, but how do we start to shift that paradigm and have it be okay for, you know, more of a feminine touch to things? Does that make sense what I'm asking you?
Of course, yeah, and it's a fantastic question. Thank you for asking it. And you know, we work with a lot of men, and it's beautiful to actually see men and you know, talking about men who are senior leaders and they are high achievers. It's beautiful to watch them actually understand that they have a feminine polarity within them and how to embrace that feminine polarity within them and give themselves permission to do so, right? And this is linked to emotional intelligence. This is the ability to feel and to connect with the inner world, the emotional world. And we have to say that, you know, the patriarchal system is hurting both men and women in different ways. But men have been taught from a very early age that it's wrong to feel, it's weak to feel. And so we have a lot of men coming to us and they are completely numb emotionally and they don't understand what's wrong with them. They're like, I've got everything, I'm ticking all the boxes, but there is nothing. I feel no joy, I feel no drive, there is no passion, just because they have learned from a very early age to actually stay in their heads, right? They are completely cut. And you know, it happened to me on the trading floor. I had no choice to do that. So reclaiming my feminine energy was also a big part of my work. But so it's just mental understanding, right? That we need feminine energy within us because it's the ability to actually have emotional intelligence. And if we can work with the emotional agility so we master our emotions, there is no reason to be afraid of them. Rather, we really want to embrace them so that they become our inner compass. And then it becomes a superpower to make decisions, actually, to feel the room, to read the room, to feel the energy of people. So, you know, even in business and performance, it's something that we do require. And in this world that is, you know, VUCA, volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous, we need that emotional compass to make decisions, because if we make decisions just with our minds, we really have mental health issues. It's too much. There is, you know, we are being asked to make decisions every day, all the time, every minute, right?
Yes.
So, yeah. So it's that acceptance that we need to reclaim that feminine energy, and that we need more feminine energies within our leaders. Not just women, it's more femininity within our leaders, right? And then how do we do this? Well, by working on ourselves and by leveling up our emotional intelligence, which honestly is not something one should be scared of. I have a lot of people who, you know, when I explain that to them, they're like, oh my gosh, what does it mean? And you know, we also have the kind of cliche of the woman who is a bit of a drama, you know, personality, a drama archetype that shouts. And so it's also our role as women to come to a place of mastery of our emotions, so that we can show what it means to actually stand strong in our emotional power with resilience, but you know, with mastery and agility. So that's the way, that's the work, and you know, that's one of the things we teach. But it's yeah, that's the pathway. And once we have emotional intelligence, we can access spiritual intelligence, which is actually intuition, which is a higher caliber tool when it comes to actually making decisions and connecting with our purpose and having a positive impact. And we cannot have spiritual intelligence without emotional intelligence, because we will not know if it's our intuition speaking or our ego and a trauma response.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, it's funny you say that, because one of the things that I work on when I'm working with clients around conscious leadership, it's understanding who's making the decision, right? Is it the ego making the decision? Is it the know-it-all? Like what persona is showing up for you in making those decisions? So you said a number of things there, Marika, I think are so critical. Again, it's how do we harmonize both masculine and feminine energy within us, because that helps to make us more whole and helps us to lead in a more inclusive and holistic way. You know, I think the other thing I really picked up on what you were sharing there is we've had this tendency in society to lead by knee-jerk reacting, right? It's like quick decisions. There's so much complexity that's coming at leaders all the time. And when we have a little more of that feminine balance or that feminine energy, we can slow that down a little bit and really start to look at the picture in a broader sense. And so when you were talking about the collective earlier, I think that helps us bring that collective together so that people can make, you know, really decisions that are more holistic and that will be better for the masses versus that short term, you know, let's decide on something. I love that. So when you think about, you know, organizations and different leaders, where do you think the resistance comes from, or why they might be reluctant to embrace conscious leadership?
Yeah. Well, there are different stages of, you know, organizations, and obviously, there are some organizations who are really holding on to the old paradigm, and they are mostly led by men. And they're just, you know, in any transition, even if you work with an organization to transform their culture, you will always see that you will have some early adopters, ambassadors, you know, kind of mass, middle, and then the ones that are holding on, right? So there are some that are still holding on. I have to say the pandemic has kind of broken down a lot of barriers, because there was no choice, right? So that's a fantastic consequence of it. And you know, even embracing flexible working, remote working, and demonstrating that it can work. It has its strengths and weaknesses, but you know, it's like embracing change. So it's hard now for a CEO or an HR director to really hold on with full rationality to the old paradigm, without, you know, really honestly looking a bit out of date. And then we have, you know, the organizations that are interested, observing, that really see that actually they can't really stay away from it. You know, it's not a nice to have, it's becoming a must have, but they are a bit questioning the results and the why, which is great, because now we have loads of data that actually demonstrate the efficiency of conscious leadership. So, you know, for those people who need clear, you know, data and measurements, that's great. And then we also have the early adapters or the ambassadors who have been embracing this trend. And you know, I call it a trend, but it's much more than that, for a few years already. And those organizations are really the ones that are ahead, and have been able to gain market shares or stay, you know, market leaders and retain talents, and really be seen as organizations that are conscious, are making a difference in the way they take care of their employees, but in the way they sell their products and their services. So, and also, the collective is asking for that, not only when they buy products and services, but also, like, for instance, Gen Z, they will not work for a company that doesn't have a purpose or a mission to serve the collective. So, and they will be 30% of the workforce by 2030. We have 70% of knowledge workers who have suffered a burnout in the last 12 months. So you cannot deny that, employees need some support when it comes to mental health and emotional health, and we need to change the workplaces. So now it's really becoming something that cannot be not really embraced. There is a bit of impact washing, or whatever you want to call it, right? As always, but I don't see that as a bad thing, because some organizations embrace it because they see that they have to, but then it grows on them. It grows within their employees, and they see the changes, and the changes are tangible. So we have more and more case studies and examples of what it means to actually have conscious leadership and why it matters.
Yeah, I love that. And I mean, I'd love for you to share an example of a company that, you've worked with that has embraced it, and just what some of those results have been. If you have that handy, that would be great to hear, because sometimes to your point, it's not the nice to have anymore. It's that you must have, because it does impact so many individuals, from inside the company to everyone that you're serving outside your company.
Yeah, and to your point, a lot of leaders that we work with, I mean, all of them really have also seen the changes in their families, in their social groups, right? So that's also the beauty of conscious leadership. But yeah, to give you a case study, so we work with a company that has 60 employees. And it's one of the founders who actually asked me to come in the organization. We were working one-on-one together, and he said to me, we have a problem with the exco. The communication is not flowing. There is a lot of power games, and we really do not manage to come to make decisions together. And therefore, the strategy is never clear. So we're a bit stuck, and it feels, in our culture, people feel it. And the employees don't feel that we have a clear vision, we have a clear mission, and therefore they're not fully engaged, and they don't trust our leadership. So I actually worked with the EXCO for 2 years, and I was working closely with them, and attending the EXCO meetings, and really observing the dynamics between each member. And conscious leadership is also a path of radical truth, so there is no hiding. So our job is also to hold a mirror and say it as it is. And so I really presented to them what was going on in the power games dynamics, how they were doing drama together, how they were feeding drama, and how the different roles that each one was playing into the drama games. And it was very interesting, because the first time I mentioned that, it's almost like there was like a big bubble of, a big elephant in the room that suddenly was popping, the thing that everybody knew, but that nobody was saying. And it was just like, oh, now we can breathe again. And I was like, okay, so now that's being said, that's okay. Let's work with it, right? And so they all learn their own roles and how to actually do communication together, how to make decisions together, how to collaborate, how to co-create. And can you hear me?
Yes, you're good.
Yes, yeah. And then it was very useful, because as they were falling back onto their old patterns, since they had the language. Yes, sorry, I'm putting
That's
my
okay.
video back. Yeah, so since they had the language and the teachings, it was very quick, right? They were like, oh yes, I can see how here I am operating under that pattern that is distorted. So let me bring myself back into centeredness and alignment and show up differently in the group. So that was super efficient. And then we used our our methodology for the whole company. So the whole company had access to our tools, our teachings that are, very practical and tangible. And therefore, they all had the same language, and they could all relate to situations with a similar understanding and a similar language. And, a lot came to me and said, the work that you've done with our leaders is fantastic. We can see how they show up differently. We can see how they are triggered much less. We can see how they are much more resilient. We have gained some trust again in them, in the vision, in the mission of the company. And we have learned so much about ourselves on the way, which is fantastic, because that also shows in how we show up in our world in general. So yeah.
I love that. That's a brilliant case study, and love some of the examples of what the learnings were in that situation. And it does help to make a much more cohesive organization. And you keyed in on some of the most important things, which is about building that trust, how to communicate with each other, also how to communicate with yourself, right? Really checking in and understanding self first so that you can understand others. So a lot of really great, learnings within that organization. And, I'm sure that the data shows like a substantial return on the investment based on all of those things, because you have people working in harmony together. And not to say that you can't have different points of view, because you absolutely can. And that's what helps bring everybody to, their fuller potential. But those are great examples. So Marika, I'm just conscious of our time here. This is fabulous. And of course, I'm super passionate about the work you're doing, because I do a lot of similar work. And so hopefully you and I can have major impact on the world in helping others to become much more conscious. So what would be maybe one thing that you would want to share with our audience today that they could take away and do themselves? Something they could implement today as a conscious leader?
That's a good question. Maybe I would invite people towards reflecting on authenticity and ask themselves, at the end of the day, I always like to introduce a little bit of self-reflection at the end of the day. And, it can be a form of ritual. It can be in your bath if you have an evening bath, or, in whichever way works for you. But ask yourself a few questions. And the first one would be, where is it that today I didn't show up with authenticity? Where is it that I did hide? Or where is it that I lied to myself, or I lied to someone else? Consciously or unconsciously, we really want to bring the unconscious conscious, right? And why did that happen? So starting to, tap into the patterns, the inherited patterns and the program that we have, right? Why did I feel the need to hide or to lie? And what happened as a consequence? How did I feel as a consequence? And how could I have showed up differently if I were to show up with more authenticity? What could I have done, said, expressed, so that actually I am showing up with authenticity? So that's a pathway towards conscious leadership. Asking yourself those questions.
I love it. Those are brilliant questions, and a great way to check in, right? Like every day, are you being fully who you're meant to be? Because who else do you want to be? Right?
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. And as you said so rightly, it's consciousness is all about creating that space so that we respond rather than react. So the more we can, build that muscle, the more we'll be able to do that. And respond to challenges and opportunities in a way we're proud of, really.
Yeah, exactly. And so many other benefits. Like we could have a whole nother podcast on that. Talking about how we reduce stress in our lives, and that decision making, like why that is so important. Marika, this has been terrific. Thank you so much for joining us today and sharing the work and the research that you've been doing on conscious leadership and the impact that you're having. I'm super grateful to hear that, and, happy to hear that I have another person in the world that's as passionate about it as I am. So Thank you. Thank you for, just everything that you brought today and, just your beautiful energy. So we appreciate that so much.
Oh, thank you so much, Vicky. It was a pleasure and a pleasure to meet you as well. I'm very grateful that, it's more than we need a lot of us.
Yes, we do. So I will say to our audience, thank you for showing up today and being here to, take part in this conversation. And, I hope that you'll spend a little time with Marika's parting words there and do some reflection on, how or when are you not being authentic and how do you be more fully who you're meant to be? So, once you've done that, if you have questions, you can, reach out to me directly, or you can reach out to Marika. I'm sure she'd be happy to answer any further questions from you. And she's at consciousleadership.org. That's a great way to get in touch with her. And so, I know it's not, there's not tons of time in our day. And so we're really grateful when you listen in on the WIL Talk podcast. Like, that means a lot to us. And if you're curious about your own leadership and how your leadership is showing up, feel free to go on to WIL Empowered, that's 1L, and you can take our free leadership quiz. And that'll give you some insight into how you might be showing up and where your strength is and where there may be some gaps. And so I'd love to hear, how that turns out for you. And again, thank you. We know you have a choice as to who you listen to. And so we're super grateful to have you signing into the WIL Talk podcast. So thank you, everyone. And we look forward to seeing you on our next conversation. Take care.